So, before we get started, I'm going to review, or for some of you it may be new, what a GCF is. Greatest common factor.
Oh, no.
You need to know this. So if I give you two numbers, let's say 16 and 6. I am asking you for the largest number that you can divide both 16 and 6 by. What is that number?
4.
You cannot do 6 divided by 4.
2.
It is 2. Okay.
9.
What about 10 and 15?
5.
5. You can divide them both by 5. What about 12 and 20?
6. No, that's a lot.
2. You can divide them both by 2, but that is not the greatest.
4.
You can also divide them both by 4. Now, what if I throw in some x's?
What you mean?
So, what if I do 6x squared and 8x? So, first look at the 6 and the 8. What can you divide both 6 and 8 by?
2.
You can divide them both by 2. How many x's do they have in common? Just one. This one over here only has the x. So they only have an x in common. What about 9x squared and 12x? You can divide them both by 3, and they both have at least an x. Good. Okay, what about 17x squared and 14x? You can divide them both by 7.
Or 2.
7 divided by 2 gives you a decimal. You can divide them both by 7, and they both have a x. So 7x is the GCF. All right, let's do one more. Let's see. Let's do 10x squared and 5x. You can divide them both by 5, and they both have an x. So this right here is going to be very important for you to know how to do for this lesson. So today we're going to be factoring when we have a number in the very front. And this is where it becomes quite a bit more complicated. There's a lot more steps. That one extra number makes a huge difference in your problem. And so there are a lot of steps, but we're going to take them very slowly, one at a time. There is a very small setup that you have to do for each problem, and I'm going to show you what that is. And that comes from step 2 and 3. We're going to create a 2 by 2 box, like a window. So sometimes that's called a Punnett square. Now in step 3, it says place your ax squared, which is this, in the top left corner, and your c in the bottom right corner. So every question that we see, you're going to have to start out doing that.
So we gotta make a box on every one.
Yep. So now we're going to get into some actual examples, okay, where we're going to work step by step. You've got to be paying attention. If you miss a step, if you miss a minute, you might miss a step and then you're going to be confused. So you've got to be paying attention. So starting with number 1, when you make your box, leave a little bit of room to the top and a little bit of room to the left. So don't draw it like right on the edge. So that's step 2. Step 1 was to make sure it's set equal to 0, and that's all of the ones I give you are going to be set equal to 0. So step 2 was to create your box. Step 3, place your ax squared. So in my case, it's 2x squared in the top left corner, and C, what is my C? 4 in the bottom right corner. So then I'm going to go to step 4, and I'm going to label these steps just to kind of help us stay organized and stay working step by step, because each step is very important. Step 4 says multiply A by C. My A is 2, C is 4. So 2 times 4 equals 8. That number, I'm going to use that. Step 5 says, look for 2 numbers that multiply to be the number we got in step 4. What number did we get in step 4? 8. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to be 8 and add to be your B value. What is my B? 9. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to be 8 but add to be 9. Does anybody know what those 2 numbers might be? 1 and 8. Very good. Or you could have said 8 and 1. Very good. Once you find these 2 numbers, put them in the empty boxes along with an X. So one of my boxes is going to get 1x, and my other box is going to get 8x. It doesn't matter which one you put where, but when you're doing the notes, I would do the same thing that I do, just so you don't get confused. Are there any questions on how I've got anything so far?
Step 4 and 5. What do you multiply and add 8 and 9 to?
So to get where I had this 8, step 4 told me to multiply A and C. So I did 2 times 4, which is 8. And so that's where that 8 come from. I need 2 numbers that multiply to be 8 and add to be your B, which we said was 9. And they knew that those numbers were 1 and 8. Because 1 times 8 is 8. 1 plus 8 is 9.
So you just add those to 2 and 4, 8 and 9? Or why does it say multiply and add?
Because I had to, just like we did in the last bit, I needed 2 numbers that multiplied to be 8 and add to be 9. And those were 1 and 8.
Oh.
Alright, and so those numbers go over here in these boxes. Now step 6 says find the GCF, which is what we did on this paper, while we did that, find the GCF of each row and column. So let's start with this column right there. 2x squared and 8x. What can you divide 2 and 8 by? You can divide them both by 2. Do they both have an x? They do. And that goes at the top. This column. What can you divide a 1 and a 4 by? Just 1. Do they both have an x? No. So I do not put an x. What can you divide 2 and 1 by? Just 1. Do they both have an x? Yes. What can you divide 8 and 4 by? You can divide them both by 2, but also by 4. We want the bigger number. Do they both have an x? No. So my factors are 2x plus 1. I don't necessarily need to put 1x. Just x is fine. X plus 4. So your factors, that's what's on top is a factor, and what's on the side is a factor. These are just your factors, but I am trying to find x-intercepts. How do I find an x-intercept from a factor? Set it equal to 0. So if I have 2x plus 1 equals 0, what should my first step be? Subtract 1. And we get 2x equals negative 1. And then what do I do? Divide by 2. So x equals negative 1 over 2. So I have one of my x-intercepts at negative 1/2. The other one, I do x plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4, very good. And we get x equals negative 4. So, because these are harder and it's really easy to make some mistakes, something that you really should do with each problem is check your work. So one place that you could check is actually up here. I should have checked before I did this. So in order to check, type in the problem. 2x squared plus 9x plus 4. And you're going to get some random number. It just depends on what was stored for the x. And then type in these factors. Parentheses, 2x plus 1.
So much going on.
Parentheses, x plus 4. If those numbers match, then I knew that when I got to this step, I had done everything correctly. It didn't take me long. It did not even take me a minute, and I could probably do it a lot faster if I wasn't talking through it.
I cannot do this fast. Make sure you're following along with each and every step.
go on to number 2. Let's go back to step 1. Is it set equal to 0 in the beginning?
Yep.
Yes. Step 2. Create a 2 by 2 box. Go ahead and do that. Step 3. Place your ax squared, that's this first part, in the top left corner and your c in the bottom right corner. That's the initial setup. You don't have to do any math or think about anything for your setup. Step 4 says multiply A by C. So my A is 3 times my C is 4. And what is 3 times 4? 12. Now, step 5 tells us we're actually going to find two numbers that when I multiply them, I get 12. Where did my 12 come from? Step 4. And those numbers add to be 8. Where did the 8 come from? Your B, the number in the middle, your B value in step 5. Add to be your B value. So you need to think, what two numbers can you multiply to be 12, but also add to be 8? Don't yell them out just yet. Take a second to think about it. What are those two numbers? 2 and 6. And we take those two numbers and put them in the empty squares along with an X. That is right there. Once you find these two numbers, put them in the empty boxes along with an X. So I'm going to put the 2 up there and the 6 at the bottom. If you reverse them, it's fine, but your top and side would be reversed. So I would just do it the way I do it. Alright, and now we have to find the GCF. What can you divide both 3 and 6 by?
2. No.
You can divide them both by 3. If you try to do 3 divided by 2, you get a decimal. You can divide them both by 3. Do they both have an X? Yes, they do. So you put an X. What can you divide both 2 and 4 by? Divide them by 2. Do they both have an X? Nope, so I don't put an X. What can you divide both 3 and 2 by? Just 1. Do they both have an X? Yep. Give it an X. What can you divide 6 and 4 by? 2. Do they both have an X? No. So it does not get an X. So my factors At the top, 3x plus 2. And my other one is x plus 2.
So all the ones beside it are what you're dividing by?
Like what I have in purple,
Those are
that's the GCF. I asked myself, what can I divide both 3 and 6 by? That's essentially finding the GCF. Those are your factors. But I don't want you to stop at your factors. I want you to actually find the x-intercepts, which means that you set them both equal to 0. So 3x plus 2 equals 0. What's my first step? Subtract 2. And we get 3x equals negative 2. And divide by 3. And so we get x equals negative 2 over 3. And then the other one is x plus 2 equals 0. And then I subtract 2 to get x equals negative 2. Number 3, I want you to go ahead and just draw in your box and fill in these two boxes, the two squares. You don't have to find your two numbers yet, just do the box. So this is what your box should look like. So from step 4, I'm looking for two numbers. No, I'm not. I'm multiplying 5 and 16, sorry. And that does give us 80. Step 5, I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 80 and add to be what? 18. Do what? 2 and 9 multiply to be 18. We want them to multiply to be 80. 8 and 10. 8 times 10 is 80, and 8 plus 10 is 18. Well, they add to be 18. Alright, so I'm going to put an 8 and an X, a 10 with an X. I want you to try to do your GCFs. So try to get the two numbers at the top and the two numbers on the side. So 5 and 10 can both be divided by 5, and they both have an X. So your GCF is 5X. 8 and 16, I can divide them both by 8. But they do not have both have an X. 5 and 8 is just 1. There's nothing else I can divide them both by, but they do both have an X. And then 10 and 16, I can divide them both by 2. They do not both have an x. So my factors are 5x plus 8 and x plus 2. So we have to set those factors equal to 0. I subtract 8. I get 5x equals negative 8. And then divide by 5 to get x equals negative 8/5. And then x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 2 gives me x equals negative 2.